wonder why your job feels more like a hamster wheel than a ladder to success? Maybe it's not your boss's fault. Could it be a larger, more pervasive issue, one that's woven into the very fabric of society? Perhaps the answer lies in the shadowy corners of neoliberalism. So what is this neoliberalism we speak of? It's a term that's been thrown around a lot, often as sort of a boogeyman of modern economics. But what does it really mean? Well, in essence, neoliberalism is an economic philosophy, a worldview that places a heavy emphasis on the power of free markets. It's like that cool kid in school who always insisted on doing things their own way, no matter what the teacher said. The core principles of neoliberalism revolve around the belief in the supremacy of individual liberty and the free market. It's a philosophy that believes in the magic of the invisible hand, that sweet, sweet, self-regulating force of the market. Now, let's take a step back in time to the late 20th century. The world was a different place then. The Beatles were on the radio, bell-bottoms were in style, and Keynesian economics, with its emphasis on government intervention, was the order of the day. But then, something changed. The winds of the economic thought began to shift. Enter neoliberalism, stage right. It was a reaction to what was perceived as the overbearing hand of the state in economic affairs. The argument was simple. Let markets be markets. Let supply and demand do their thing, unhindered by pesky regulations or government meddling. Neoliberalism also emphasizes the importance of individual liberty, a belief that each person should be free to make their own economic choices. It's like being at a buffet where everyone gets to choose what they want, rather than having the chef decide for everyone. Of course, like any economic philosophy, neoliberalism isn't without its critics. Some argue that it places too much faith in the market, ignoring the role of government in providing public goods and services. But that's a debate for another day. In short, neoliberalism is about letting markets, not governments, call the shots. It's about believing in the power of individual choice and the magic of the invisible hand. Now, whether you agree with it or not, there's no denying its impact on our world today. So the next time someone mentions neoliberalism, you'll know exactly what they're talking about. But is neoliberalism the villain in our story? Well, let's dive into the arguments that paint neoliberalism in a more positive light, shall we? First off, let's talk about economic growth. Neoliberal policies often advocate for free market capitalism, which allows businesses to operate with little to no government interference. This approach, proponents argue, leads to economic growth. Industries are allowed to expand, new businesses are encouraged to set up shop, and competition thrives. The idea is that when businesses flourish, so does the economy. It's like a game of Monopoly where everyone's invited to play. Next up, innovation. The neoliberal perspective believes that competition fosters not just growth, but also innovation. When businesses battle it out on the marketplace, they're pushed to consistently innovate to stay ahead. Think about it. If you're running a race, you're going to give it your all to surge ahead, right? Similarly, in the marketplace, businesses aim to offer the best products and services to gain an edge over their competitors. They consistently strive to better their offerings, leading to a surge in innovation. Lastly, increased competition. With neoliberalism, competition is the name of the game. The belief is that a competitive market leads to better products and services. When businesses compete, they're incentivized to improve their offerings, leading to better quality and lower prices for consumers. It's like a grand buffet where you get to pick the best dish at the best price. However, let's not forget that every coin has two sides. While these arguments create a compelling case for neoliberalism, they don't paint the full picture. The focus on economic growth, innovation, and competition often overlooks the potential downsides like wealth disparity, worker exploitation, and environmental degradation. So neoliberalism, hero or villain? Well, like most things in life, it's not that simple. It's more of a mixed bag, with both pros and cons. So it seems like neoliberalism isn't all bad, right? Well, hold that thought as we delve deeper into the counter-arguments in the next scene. Stay tuned. Hold your horses, the story isn't over yet. Before you go running off to pledge allegiance to the flag of neoliberalism, let's take a step back and examine some of the criticisms. You see, not everyone has bought their ticket for the neoliberal love train. Let's start with the big one: income equality. Remember the old saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer? Well, some critics argue that this is exactly what neoliberalism promotes. When the market is left to its own devices, those with more resources tend to accumulate even more, while those with less often struggle to keep up. It's like a game of Monopoly, where one player starts with all the hotels. Sure, the other players could technically still win, but the odds aren't exactly in their favor, are they? Then we have the issue of exploitation. Critics argue that neoliberal policies can lead to the exploitation of workers, particularly in less developed countries. Without government regulations, companies are free to pay workers as little as they want and provide them with less than ideal working conditions. It's like being invited to a fancy dinner, only to find out you're the one washing the dishes. And finally, there's the lack of government oversight. In a neoliberal world, the government takes a backseat, allowing businesses to steer the car. But what happens when those businesses decide to take a detour down Greed Avenue or Corruption Boulevard? Without government watching, there's nothing to stop them. It's like leaving a fox to guard the hen house. Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well for the chickens. So while neoliberalism might sound like a capitalist dream, it's not without its drawbacks. Just like a shiny new car, it might look great on the outside, but you'll want to take a closer look under the hood before you drive it off the lot. Guess every coin has two sides, doesn't it? But what does all this mean for you and me? Well, let's delve into that, shall we? Neoliberalism, with its free market fanaticism, has a way of seeping into every nook and cranny of our everyday lives. It's like that over-enthusiastic neighbor who insists on sharing their home-brewed kombucha with you, whether you asked for it or not. Let's start with job security, or should we say the lack thereof. In the neoliberal world, companies are free to hire and fire at will, all in the name of efficiency and profit. It's a bit like being on a roller coaster, except it's your livelihood on the line instead of just a thrill ride. There are no safety nets here, only the cold, hard ground of market forces. And speaking of safety nets, let's talk about social services. In this grand neoliberal vision, government services are trimmed down to the bone. Healthcare, education, public transport, all seen as prime opportunities for cost-cutting and privatization. After all, why should the state provide these services when the private sector can do it instead? The result? You're left footing the bill for services that were once public goods. It's a bit like going to a potluck and finding out you have to pay for the potato salad. Now, onto consumer choices. Here, neoliberalism promises a smorgasbord of options. But is it really choice when all the options are produced by a handful of mega corporations? It's a bit like being in a candy store, but all the sweets are made by the same company. So much for variety being the spice of life. So it turns out neoliberalism is more than just a buzzword. It's a philosophy, a way of life that has profound impacts on how we work, live, and consume. Whether we like it or not, we're all neck deep in the neoliberal kombucha. And let's be honest, it's an acquired taste.